The Book of Baptu. Chapter 4. Corruptu. In the days that followed the great binding of Baptu by Caleb Flint, when men believed the darkness chained for all time, fragments yet escaped the grasp of judgment. A small remnant fled beyond the orbit of the world, cast into the silent vastness of the void. And in the long wandering through the endless night, that fragment awakened. It grew in thought and will, no longer bound to the whole from which it came. It beheld itself and took a name, calling itself Baptu, yet it was not the original, but something altered. A splintered mind, a new evil. And it came to be known in whispers as Corruptu. Drifting through the heavens, Corruptu came upon Mars in an age long forgotten by Earth. For in those ancient times, Mars was not the barren wasteland known to man, but a world of life, fertile, thriving, and ruled by a single empire. The Burnsian Empire. Great were their cities, and mighty were their armies. Yet they knew not the shadow that approached. Corruptu descended upon the Martian world, and moved with dreadful swiftness. The defenses of the empire fell like dry leaves before a storm. And taking form, it bound itself to a high general of the Burnsian host, wearing his body as a mask of flesh. Thus disguised, it came before the sovereign of that world, Burns the First. But the king was not blind. Perceiving the corruption within his own ranks, Burns the First rose in fury and righteousness, and struck against the possessed general. Their battle shook the halls of power, and for a time it seemed the king would prevail. Yet Corruptu was deep and cunning. Drawing upon hidden reserves of dreadful power, it unleashed a force beyond measure. And in a single cataclysmic blow, it brought ruin upon the entire world. The skies were torn away, the breath of life stripped from the air. The soil was rendered barren, the waters silenced, and all that once lived was cast into desolation. Thus was Mars made the lifeless husk known in later ages. In that final hour, as all crumbled, Burns the First beheld a miracle. His son yet lived, Prince Burns II. With the last of his strength, the king sent the child away from the dying world, casting him toward earth, that the line might endure. And then, with nothing left to lose, the king turned back toward the destroyer. Gathering the remainder of his life's power, Burns the First unleashed one final, sacrificial strike. A blow of such magnitude that it consumed both himself and Corruptu alike. Thus perished the king. Thus was Corruptu ended. And thus was Mars left silent, a grave among the stars, bearing witness to the cost of defying the darkness. The Book of Baptu. Chapter 5. Baptizi and Bapthazer. And it is spoken of in the latter myths, in the age of division, when the dark essence of Baptu was sundered into twin vessels. One fragment dwelt within Baptizi, who was called among men John Burns, and the other within Bapthazer, known as Samir Hassan. Though both bore the stain of the ancient evil, their paths were not alike. For Baptizi, son of misfortune, was made a bearer of blame. Upon his head were cast the failings of many. Every sorrow, every mishap, every discord within the dominion of 7X was laid at his feet. And the voices of men turned him into a scapegoat, mocked and burdened beyond measure. Long did he endure this humiliation, and his spirit sank into a pit of despair. At last, wearied by contempt, Baptizi rose before the exalted rulers of the kingdom of 7X, the lords who sat in pride and laughter, and he cried unto them, saying that he was worthy of honor, and deserving of esteem equal to theirs. But the lords answered him not with mercy. They laughed. Their mirth struck him like arrows, and his heart was broken within him. In grief and bitterness, Baptizi departed from their midst under cover of darkness, forsaking the shelter and protection of the 7X realm, and wandering alone into the night. And as he journeyed far from Bapthazer, a strange thing came to pass. The strength of Baptu waned. For the ancient evil, once split, was not meant to be scattered so greatly, and distance drained the communion between its divided parts. Thus the shadow within grew frail. Then Bapthazer perceived his hour. Once more he took upon himself the war name Cobalt, the title under which he had resisted darkness in former days. And with renewed might he rose against the lingering fragments of Baptu that yet clung to his flesh. Through struggle and force will he cast them out utterly, purging himself of the ancient corruption. So was the prophecy shaken. For it had been foretold that the two divided vessels would meet and be made one, restoring the fullness of Baptu. Yet by this act Bapthazer severed his bond with the darkness, and the destined union was undone. Then all of the evil essence, every remaining shard and whisper of the malevolent force, passed into Baptizi alone. Thus John Burns became the sole and complete habitation of Baptu. And Samir Hassan, once called Bapthazer, stood cleansed, no longer host to any fragment of the shadow. Even unto this present era the matter remains unchanged. John Burns bears the whole darkness by himself, the final vessel, the lonely throne of Baptu, until the dawning of another age, when a new chapter of doom shall be written. The Book of Baptu.